the library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Thanks, Elspeth. Thank you for being here, everybody. It's just, wow, on such a warm night. This is a special treat. So I'm gonna, these two books are both, thank you both, too, for being here, Jill and Mark.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks for doing this.
This is a real serendipitous thing because these two books were written, obviously, you know, quite separately, but they talk to each other. I feel. Do you feel that they do?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they
Definitely.
like they almost. I think
They're friends on the bookshelf.
Yeah.
We meant it. We planned it, actually.
Yeah, right. But they both took me on journeys, and so of different types, very different types. And so I hope that we'll be able to talk a little bit about this. Jill's book, Love Affair with the Unknown, Leaning into the Uncertainty of Modern Life, for me was a very was an inward journey. I went really, really deep. Thank you, and learned a lot about you. But I learned a lot about, I think, how the world is unfolding. I think that's where I went with this in a really fascinating way. But it was very much a journey within. And of course, Mark's book is 10 different journeys. It's called Live to See the Day. It's sort of the art of perseverance, you might say. And you went on at least 10 journeys all around the world.
Yeah, my wife would say I went on too many journeys, but yeah, no, I did about. I think I went to 3 continents, multiple countries, and yeah, I spent about 3 months on the road reporting this out over the course of 6 years. It wasn't like it was just in one calendar year.
Right, and talking about the adventures that all these other people had been on and are on. And so I wonder if, just to start off, you could each just tell us a little bit, the elevator pitch, as we were talking about, of what the book is about, each of you. Could you start, Jill?
My book is, I guess, an examination of how we can all rethink and examine our relationship with uncertainty, as ubiquitous and inevitable as it is in all of our lives, regardless of circumstance. From the micro to the macro, there is uncertainty in all of our lives every day, every hour of every day. And the driving medical mystery running through my investigation into that idea was my own uncertainty in health. I had a undiagnosed and undiagnosable for many, many months situation on my hands that gave me a front row seat to my subject matter. So I didn't intend to write about myself, and it's not a memoir, but that's sort of a driving perspective that is woven throughout that more broad inquiry.
And you're okay, right?
And I am totally better.
Yes.
Yes. Hallelujah. Yes. Thank you.
Should have said spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
First of all, I just want to say it's very weird to be on this side. I've been hosting at the TPL for many, many years, and I'm not used to being asked questions, so apologies if I start jumping in and asking questions.
Feel free.
I'm much more comfortable asking the questions. So you Live to See the Day, in a nutshell, is about people who have devoted their lives, their careers to pursuing goals that they know they're never going to achieve, or they are pursuing goals that are only going to be achieved years, decades, centuries, millennia, millions of years after they're dead. And so what kind of drew me to that was, what does it mean to live a rewarding life when there's no chance of reward, is the nutshell. And that was the question I tried to ask, and that's the question that kind of set me off onto my journey.
You know, you went through so many different topics. This is the thing that fascinated me. It was like from poverty, activists, to music, to extraterrestrial life, there's just a huge range of ways in which you got at this topic. And it fascinated me to figure out how you found these people and why you found these particular people.
Yeah, I mean, there is an entirely different book. You know, there's probably 15 chapters that were left on the cutting room floor that I was mulling and researching and interviewing for at the earlier stages of this book. And at one point, you know, I sat down with my editor at the time, and we basically, you know, started to mapping out what the book would look like and whose stories would complement one another. But, you know, how this book started really is in 2007, when I was a junior reporter at the National Post. There was a federal election, and I wanted to profile not one of the front runners. Not that I would have been allowed to profile, you know, Ignatia for I can't remember who was running, or Harper, but I wanted to profile one of the candidates who knew they had no chance of being elected. And I was living in Toronto, downtown Toronto at the time. Bill Graham, who I believe was defense minister at the late Bill Graham, and there was a woman who was running for what is now called the Animal Protection Party of Canada, and her name is Liz White. And this was a nascent party. It had only been around a few years as a political entity, and I decided, okay, let's see if she'll let me profile her, even though basically my elevator pitch was, I know you're not going to win. Let me write about you for a national audience. And for whatever reason, she said yes, you know, and she invited me on the campaign trail with her, and, you know, went to the party headquarters and listened in as her and her advisors, you know, discussed policy and strategy, went to debates with her, and I wrote, you know, a 3,000-word piece that was on the cover of the section, and I was right. She got about 100 votes, and but it remained, you know, in the years that followed, one of the pieces that I was most proud of. And, you know, it was a good piece, but I got a lot of compliments about it. And what was interesting to me is in the years that went on, I kept tabs on her career, and every time there was an election, provincial and federal, because she was kind of Catholic, and when she ran, or how she ran, she would always get, you know, like a few dozen votes. It wasn't like the party was like the Green Party, where over the years it was getting more and more traction. She would get 80 votes, 120 votes, 140 votes, but she ran every time. And after about a decade of watching this happen, it kind of struck me. There's something there's something admirable about that. There's something beautiful, might not be the right word, but to me, as somebody who is a terrible procrastinator, I quit the first kind of minute I get any kind of resistance. I was like, okay, what does she have that I don't? And what do other people who kind of fit that criteria have that I don't? And so when I started like researching this book, as you pointed out, I found it in all these different kind of areas that I hadn't suspected, from the arts to the sciences to, you know, everything in between.
Right. And it just, does one of them stick out apart from Liz White?
As far as like a favorite person I profiled?
A favorite odd person?
I mean, they're all my favorites. I think, you know, it depends on the day you ask me the question, but one of the people who I think really, really encapsulates the spirit of this book is a gentleman by the name of Richard Thorns, who is a man who lives in a small town just south of London. He's in his early 60s now, I believe. And he has spent the last 15 years trying to prove that a duck that every credible scientist and birder and you know, biologist says it's extinct is still out there in the world. And he was working as a clerk at a shop selling socks and underwear, as he put it to me the first time we spoke. And he was on his lunch break at a library, and he came across a book called Disappearing Birds by Tim Halliday, a renowned British biologist. And he came across the story of the pink-headed duck. And, you know, most people would read that and say, that's an interesting story. It's too bad the duck is extinct. He decided, no, it's still out there in the world. And so despite the fact that he has no scientific background at all, he has been going to Myanmar, which is where he thinks it is, on an annual basis, basically, since 2007, 2008. He doesn't speak Burmese, and he is trying to find it. And so, you know, he is somebody who didn't have the background that some of the other people I write about do. He didn't have the money. You know, he lives a very, very modest life, and he supports himself as an ambulance driver right now for the National Health Services. And yet, this is the way he's decided to spend his remaining years, and this is the reason he feels he's been put on this planet. So he's kind of like, you know, one of the mascots, I think, for this book.
Yeah, no, it's just fascinating, and the book reads just like you just heard. That is how the book reads. It's in this beautiful conversational, gorgeous tone, and so of course is Jill's book. I'm just going to bring it up here again.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
There. It's just so I can look at them both. But your book, Jill, is fascinating to me because it's so philosophical, I think, and it led me to think about, why is uncertainty so hard for us? What do you think it is?
I mean, I guess there's one answer to that is sort of evolutionary. We're all here because we've adapted to, paying attention to what's safe and what feels comfortable, and remembering, dangers down that path, but mangoes are down that path. So, that's literally how our species has evolved to in some ways avoid risk and the discomfort of uncertainty. We're wired. I've found in my research an experiment, which I feel any one of us who's had raised a child past toddlerhood has done ourselves, but there's a famous experiment from the 1960s, I think, called the strange situation experiment, which is when a toddler is put, a 1-year-old or something, taken from their mother and given to a very kindly, welcoming, lovely stranger. And we all know what the toddler does. They don't like the unfamiliar. They want to be back in their mother's arms. And we're all still kind of like that toddler at some level. So I guess that's partly the answer to the roots of our discomfort with uncertainty. I think that, my personal opinion, which I think is, backed up by everyone's sort of anecdotal experience, is that we're getting less comfortable with uncertainty. On top of that, maybe biological starting point, we're growing less comfortable with it, partly because of these things in our pockets, and we're relying more and more on devices and technology to keep us within the speedy, the efficient, the familiar, the safe. I can stay at home and order my groceries instead of actually having to go out and deal with the elements. I can check the app that'll tell me how I'm going to get there instead of having to stop and ask for directions. I mean, all those tiny little acts and muscles that we used to have to flex to find our way or to get our meals or figure out what the weather was going to be like tomorrow, those muscles have weakened because they can be, those decisions and questions can be resolved by technology, and it's convenient, but the trade-off is that we've become less comfortable outside our comfort zone has shrunk, and I think at our peril. So, I mean, coming here tonight, I took the wrong path coming out of the subway, and I saw somebody walking his dog, and I asked him how to find the library, and he didn't speak very good English, and we chatted about his dog, and anyway, and I thought afterwards, it was like a brief exchange that didn't really amount to anything, but I thought how easily we don't do that, and I could have so easily have pulled up my little blue dot locating me on the map, and I don't know why that was better, but it just was. It was an exchange with a human being that, anyway, so I think we're doing less and less of all of those things that wind up making us less comfortable with uncertainty. Right at the same time that uncertainty we can access all those sources of anxiety about uncertainty from the same devices and the 24-hour news cycle. So it feels, uncertainty and the world feels worse to us than maybe it actually is, partly because of our overexposure to it, like a fire hose coming at us 24 hours a day, and partly because we're a little more, no, wait, I just wanted it to be kind of contained and cozy and familiar. And so we're less able to handle all the things happening at us.
the apps are training us, in other words.
Yeah.
And it was
Educating us.
it was something I only realized when I was reading your book last month. But one of the things that I think it was below the surface when I was writing mine was the people I focus on have embraced uncertainty. Like their
100%.
entire lives are revolving around the fact that they are okay with the fact that they might never find these answers. I mean, in some ways, what they are actually certain, because they know this is never going to happen, and it's the rest of us who are kind of uncertain about the way they live their lives. But I think that has given them, when you have that kind of relationship with uncertainty, and it frees you sometimes,
And I think that's what's so appealing about your book and the characters in it. These stories, so well told, are of people doing the exact opposite of pulling up an app. I mean, they're living and brushing up against, they're seeking possibility and believing in possibility, which I like to say is the flip side of the uncertainty coin. We feel uncertain, but the flip side of uncertainty is possibility. And they are in the hopeful embrace of possibility. They are getting out into the world and living and brushing up against all kinds of plant, animal, human, experiences that even reading about them feels just kind of invigorating because it's so different than watching Netflix. I mean, it's so.
It strikes me though that what you're arguing in your book, and maybe you are too, Mark, is that there's a real value in uncertainty, in having that. I think you say, I'm quoting now from your book, you say uncertainty is the birthplace of possibility. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that is very, that's a really tough concept for us these days.
It is, but I think it's, as soon as you stop and think about it, it's right there. But we don't stop and think about it. But I had a lot of time to stop and think about it, which is how the book came about.
Right.
But I feel like in uncertainty, and I may be kind of bastardizing Rebecca Solnit's words here a little bit in her book, Hope in the Dark, but uncertainty gives us space to act. And that's what I mean about these characters in your book. They don't know that they're going to find the pink duck, but they don't know that they're not. Or they let themselves believe that they might. And so anyways, that space to act is really the kind of casing for hope, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do understand why it can be so difficult for people to embrace that kind of uncertainty. I am guilty of turning away and shying away from it myself all the time. I mean, one of the reasons I became a journalist is because I love the structure that my job brings. I get up in the morning, and when I was a reporter, I would have an assignment editor tell me, here's what you're going to write about today. I would go do my interviews, I would write it, and it would appear in the paper the next day or the week later. Whereas I think, the people I write about is the opposite of that. I mean, they're getting up in the morning and they have no idea. Well, I mean, they know what their day is going to bring, but they don't know where that end point is going to be or whether they're ever going to reach it. And to me, I mean, I'm envious of that. I mean, one of the reasons I ended up writing the book I did is because, I was approaching middle age, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And, a lot of the people that I write about are living lives that I could only dream of and doing things that I wish I was brave enough to do, but I'm not strong enough, I'm not big enough to be able to live in that kind of all-encompassing uncertainty,
No, and don't get me wrong, I don't think I could do anything that the folks in the characters in your book do in the sort of that uncertain spirit either. But I do think we all can, reading your book, and hopefully mine as well, can help us as readers imagine, almost feel what is it I'm envious of in those characters' lives, those interesting, fascinating individuals' lives. What is it that they are doing that I'm drawn to, and then finding ways to incorporate that in our own lives. I feel like they call it psychological resilience.
Yeah.
The idea that it's the principle of a vaccine is you take a little bit of something and it builds up your immune system's resilience to be able to handle it in bigger doses. And that the idea of failure, you talked about the fear of failure as being doing things that are a little bit risky or outside our comfort zone, or we might not do them properly, they might, mess up or whatever, that builds up our psychological resilience, because we kind of pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off and say, well, I'm still here, and suddenly our ability, our sense of what we can handle has expanded a little bit. And anyway, I think that's part of what is inspirational about the people in your book. Not to say that, we're going to follow their example.
Their models, yeah. But you actually talk about some techniques to, you talk about improv, for example, about the principle of improv comedy and how that can inspire that openness, that freedom to see a door and walk through it, basically. And how does that inform this?
Well, improvisational sketch comedy, which I did in university, and the idea of it's trying to be funny on stage with no script and no lines, and none of the people working with you, nobody knows where this is going, and that kind of razor's edge or live wire of what might happen is, I just think it's a beautiful illustration of possibility. And I find, both as a performer but also as an audience member, that watching improv is for me it's the most rewarding kind of comedic performance, because that everything is happening. Everything is so immediately present, because there's nothing artificial or manufactured or prepared. It's all right happening before you. So it's kind of the most alive form of this.
You're in the now.
You're
right there, and there's nowhere else you can be if
yes.
it's going to work, right?
Which the people in your book are too. There's an aspect of that really being present to the moment and not attached to an outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about improv some more, because I did improv in high school.
Oh,
and
did you?
Okay,
everybody, a profession
that's
and a location.
Well, if we had actually
Here
been
we
thinking
go.
about this, we could have done a
We
little
could have
performance.
made a plan.
But
Okay, here's the prompt.
you couldn't pay
There's a
me
bird on
all
my
the
head.
money in the city to do it now.
No way.
But
Okay,
yet, when I reflect
hold the
on it,
proctologist recommendation.
But when I think back on it, like those times when I was on stage at different competitions were some of the most joyous, kind of fulfilling moments of my life. Just being here, probably a crowd smaller than this, and people throwing ideas at you and you having to react. And yet, for whatever reason, I can't do that now.
That's
What has
interesting.
changed?
You
What has
can't or you
changed?
don't.
I don't. I mean, I could. I wouldn't do it well.
I don't know. There's something about letting go of the fear that's pretty compelling. That was the other thing that is so clear in your book, that you talk about in your book, about nearly losing your life half a dozen times in this. It's terrifying what you went through to get this book written, but there's something liberating about letting go of that fear too, isn't there? And it seems to me that a lot of the people in your book accomplished that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people I do write about, if you get them on the right day, they will admit, they are fearful, right? It's not as if, the people I profile wouldn't want to accomplish some of these things.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, this book does have a lot to do with regret and, whether or not you achieve the things that you feel, you are meant to achieve. And that can be a scary thing, to kind of like look inside and say, maybe this isn't going to happen. Yet, I mean, it's that fear is a motivating thing. I mean, you can use the fear and propel yourself forward into, situations and pathways that you wouldn't have gone down otherwise. Yeah. So this is also a book in some ways about kind of like harnessing that fear to live a meaningful life.
Right. The other thing that seemed to come through in both books so clearly was just this sense of faith in the journey. That the journey is worth doing, and it's an experiment worth doing, no matter what it comes out with. And you both talk about faith. You talk about it very explicitly in cathedrals and.
Yeah, but there's a lot. I mean, that there is that element. One of the women who are in this book is, and she is a priest. She's a pastor, and I was raised Catholic. And as I was writing this book, I did reflect on those moments in Sunday mornings at Mass. This idea that heaven is an impossible goal, I think I say at one point. Like, it feels that way. But there's different kinds of faith. Like, there's faith in family. There's faith in career. There's faith in what you're doing is the right thing. And so there are a lot of different threads of faith that aren't just focused on the religious side of things.
I really wasn't talking about the religious side so much. I was really talking about a faith that the journey is worth taking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche to say, it's not about the finish line, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. And that is something that, was said to me time and time again.
Really?
That they don't actually care. I mean, they do care, but, they get such joy from what they're doing, and they believe in what they're doing so wholeheartedly that is what matters more than what the ultimate goal is, right? And they have faith in that element of things.
I wonder if we could ask you to read a little bit. Would you mind? Sure. There's a chunk of yours, Mark, I'm thinking of.
I haven't read from this yet. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, this is.
I apologize in advance.
It's on. Just a sec. It's page 159. Nope. Sorry. It's page 108. Your page. Yeah.
Without a trace?
Without a trace. That one single sentence, and then the sentence on the following page. I love this. This is just wonderful.
Okay, you can cut me off.
No. I want you to read this is a single sentence. It's really beautiful.
If you follow Highway 26 east out of Owen Sound, a town nestled against an inlet on the lip of Georgian Bay on the edge of Lake Huron in the northeasternmost reaches of southwestern Ontario, driving past strip malls and a shopping center, gas stations and big box stores, a car wash and a car dealership, into the countryside, past a golf course and an airport and farmers' fields sprinkled with off-white sheep and golden bales of hay, the morning sun right in your eyes, until you hit the Irish Block Road and a tiny red brick Baptist church, and turn south down an unpaved lane, the gravel pinging the undercarriage of your car like hail lashing up from the ground, past scattered houses and weathered barns, until the tops of the trees on either side join together to form a tunnel and the light fades, and you reach a dead end and, after parking, head down a twisting path that winds through the forest like something out of a fairy tale, the mosquitoes whispering in your ear. Eventually, after walking some distance, you'll arrive at a crevice that cuts deep into the earth. I stood at its rim one humid summer afternoon and looked down. The crevice, part of the Niagara Escarpment, a long cliff that bisects this part of the province, down to and past the falls for which it was named, had been used as a dump for many years, long ago. And although most of the trash was now covered by a carpet of dirt and stones, felled trees and fallen leaves, there was still evidence of its former life: crushed beer cans and scraps of rusted metal, deflated tires and jagged barbed wire poking out of the ground like tree roots growing in the wrong direction. It also might have hidden, according to Matthew Knopper, who stood beside me, the body of a young woman named Lisa Moss, missing for more than 30 years, a young woman he had never met. The search had consumed him for 5 years, but Lisa Moss's story had haunted him for much of his life.
I mean, isn't that amazing? Yeah.
People, I'm not going to throw. There was a lot of conversation whether that should stay one long sentence.
It's marvelous. It's absolutely
Thank you.
marvelous, really. And that gives you a pretty good sense. And the part, if you wouldn't mind, okay, it is the part 159. It's Ursula Le Guin. Have I got that right?
Oh, when have you ever been encouraged?
Yeah. Could you read that paragraph?
When have you ever been encouraged to make more mistakes in your life? Striving for perfection is a curse, presumably because it's unachievable. As Ursula K. Le Guin beautifully put it in her book, The Wave in the Mind, perfectionism is our most compulsive way of keeping ourselves small, a kind of psycho-emotional contortionism that gives the illusion of reaching for greatness while constricting us into increasingly suffocating smallness. Embracing the inevitability of our mistakes and normalizing them allows us to recalibrate our relationship with failure, something many of us spend a lot of time and energy being afraid of and working to avoid.
Yeah, again, isn't that just so beautifully written? Just, yeah.
I said this
Which is a
backstage,
good
but
fit with
I'll
your
bring
book.
no, bring it up. I'll bring it up again. It really felt to me like the characters in my book had read Jill's book before deciding how they were going to spend their lives, and like
Yeah.
used her book as a guidebook, and I'm kind of like reporting on the results.
Yeah,
Like
no.
it's really strange that it worked out this way.
It's absolutely hilarious. It's just, I guess what I'm stuck on is that, I mean, as I was reading these two books over the past month or so, the world changed quite a bit in that month. And it struck me that these books are coming into a moment. They're being published, they have been published, and we are reading them in a specific moment that I think they speak to in very profound ways.
It wasn't meant to be this way. Like my book, I started this book in 2019, and I sold it to my publisher in the fall of that year, and I was planning my first research trip when the world shut down. And so, this was supposed to be, I think the contract said this was supposed to hit stores in 2022. So I was a little late on meeting the deadline. But it's kind of strange. Like it is, I've heard from readers already that it's coming out at a really interesting time. So even though I was very annoyed and frustrated a lot of the time I was working on this, just because I didn't know if this was ever going to come out.
Yeah.
It's really hard to think
You
back.
were your own subject matter
I
too.
did,
pursuing-
and I hate writing about myself, but for those first 18 months of the pandemic, I would go down to my basement every day and conduct interviews over Zoom or on the phone or write a couple of graphs or do some research. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, what's the point of this? Like this is never going to come out. The world's never going to open up again, and if it does, they're not going to want this book anymore. And yet I kept doing it.
You
So in a way,
persevered.
I got a sense, just a very, very little sense of what some of the people I write go through. It was very odd how that worked out.
Yeah.
And I had a similar experience too of writing. I mean, the funny backstory is that I pitched an idea to my agent in November of 2022. I remember we met for a drink, and I'd been feeling super weird, in a combination of weirdnesses since about July. And at the time that we were meeting, I said to her, "I've got some kind of virus. Just let's not hug. I mean, we'll stay pretty far apart." And I pitched her a few ideas, and one was a book about uncertainty, because I said, I've had cancer a bunch of times, and I have a background in improv, but also I'm a live broadcaster. I've been doing that for most of my career, and all of those things I kind of had come to realize give me a pretty. I'm pretty familiar with uncertainty, and that there might be something there that I can explore and apply it to the uncertainty of our world now. And she said, of the 4 ideas I pitched her, she was like, "Oh, that's the one." She said, "Because there's so much uncertainty now." And I love thinking about that, because doesn't the uncertainty of November 2022 just seem so quaint and charming now?
Doesn't it seem quaint? Yes, it does.
So, but
Yes.
and there have been many times in the intervening months when my husband or someone would say, "Geez, your book really needs to come out now because there's so much uncertainty." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure it's still going to be uncertainty when it does come out." Anyways, and here we are. So in a way, I feel like these books could have come out in 2019 or 22 or whatever you said, or 20. Anyway, and they would have felt timely then too. It's I think always the case.
Can I
in
ask
one
a
shape
question?
or another.
Yeah.
I'm curious, at what point then, because I didn't know you had this idea, that long ago, at what point did you decide to put yourself in the story? Because we were talking about this backstage, I did not want to appear in this book. I do not like writing about myself. I find myself to be endlessly boring, and yet I had to kind of become a guide. But you really center, for good reason, obviously, but how did that kind of develop
I
over
also
the writing?
didn't want to do that.
It's very personal.
I
It's
pitched
very
this
personal.
idea at this meeting in November, and my agent said, "Okay, so I love that one." She goes, "Write something up, the pitch. We'll work up a pitch." She said, "Let's meet on Zoom in 3 weeks." So we met on Zoom in 3 weeks, and I remember I was wearing a toque. I was in my house, inside. I was wearing a toque and a scarf, and I was talking I was like, "Yeah, this virus, whatever it is, it's getting, I don't know." Anyway, I've been writing, but she said, "Okay, we'll just keep going, and let's have another Zoom in the new year." So by the new year, it's now early January, I had to call in sick from work sort of mid-December thinking, oh, I just need a couple weeks off over the holiday break, and then I'll be fine in January. So by early to mid-January, when I'm having this next call with my lovely agent, and I said, well, I've got a few scribbles I've been writing down, but I said, by this point I've seen a doctor and had 750 tests, and they're all kind of question marks. Nothing makes any sense. All your tests are normal. Everything's fine. So I said, I got a front row seat to my subject matter here. Like, I'm living this uncertainty in another way that just occurs to me. And in her wisdom, she just said, keep writing.
Whoa.
So I just was
Wow.
tinkering and exploring, also never thinking anything was going to come of it, because I didn't think I could ever get better or whatever. It was just an exercise. But those parts that are woven through the rest of the book were the act of creativity is a very powerful antidote to anxiety and stress in its own way. It does force you into the present. And so when my whole body felt like 17 bags of dirt, being able to somehow write about it and turn it into something, the act of doing that was, as I mentioned early in the book, quoting the poet Louise Gluck, writing is a revenge against circumstance. And it just felt that sort of act of some kind of revenge against circumstance. So, and then it became clear that my own sort of, the arc of my experience with uncertainty was itself an illustration of what I was trying to talk about. So that's why I ended up having to include it.
Right. It strikes me, though, that there's a lesson for this moment in each of your books. So it's not just that they appeared now, but what do they teach us about now? Mark.
I mean, for me, the answer I've been thinking, the answer I've been telling myself is the fact that everybody in my book, or many of the subjects of my book, are thinking of the long term, that they are aware of what they are pursuing won't be accomplished in their lifetime, and will only be accomplished, as I said earlier, sometimes thousands or millions of years from now, by definition tells me that they believe that the world will still be around that
Right.
long from now, right? And so I have taken a lot of solace from that, in my own life. Again, like I can't pretend I'm not aware of what's happening right now. It's like I work for a newspaper. I read the headlines. Things feel very, very dire right now, and it feels like nothing's going to get better, and it feels that the world of today is going to be the world of tomorrow and next
Right.
week. It's really, really hard to avoid that feeling, and yet the people in my book tell me that no, there's going to be a world that exists after we're gone, and it's going to be a book, or it's going to be a world of mystery and joy and curiosity and beauty and all those things. And so that is kind of like what I try to take away from my own work and from their lives, that there is going to be a world after us, and we got to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah. There's something about writing a book that's an act of faith in itself, isn't it? I mean, you address this directly.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was the books editor for the Globe and the Post, so I know kind of what goes into writing books and how they can land or not land when they come out. And I did it anyway, and you've done it. We've all done it now, and so there's something. Again, it's an act of faith,
Yeah.
right? And yet, writers still keep writing, so I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah. What about you, Jill?
I guess the lesson, if there's a lesson in my book, it would be, I don't know if this is the right answer in
It's
terms of the
okay.
lesson, but one of the most lasting pieces of advice or thoughts that I learned about and read about in my investigations for this book is from the a gentleman named William James, who was the father of American psychology, the study of psychology. And some of you are nodding. I didn't know about William James. He's the brother of Henry James of Portrait of a Lady fame. But Henry's brother William was also, quite well regarded in his own right in the field of psychology. And anyway, he's, in fact, just because it so applies to your book, there is a line that I just want to say really quickly about, that comes from William James. "The art of being wise," he wrote, "is the art of knowing what to overlook." He was a believer in indeterminism, which is clearly what everyone in Mark's book is in that school as well. He was a believer in indeterminism, the school of philosophy that argues that in any situation, there is always some degree of possibility, not necessarily dictated by the rest of reality, the constant presence of chance. And so anyway, that is William James. But the line that to me is the lesson that I come back to time and again as I, grapple with headlines and every other aspect of uncertainty coming at us hard these days, is a line that he said, which is, "Our greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another." And I think, so for me, the lesson is, and it's, I know it can sound a little Pollyanna in the face of just extraordinary suffering and evil and horror in the world right now, but recognizing, how much our thoughts about these circumstances are impacting our experience of them, and what our sense of what we're able to do is, I think, just being aware of how we handle things that make us afraid or make us anxious or upset, and how we think about them is a lasting tool that I took away from the work that I did for the book, and that I hope people will take away from the book. Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense. I think you quote someone saying, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house," in your book, and it strikes me that there is so much that these really do talk about. They are an antidote to fear. In a way, both of the books. And that's one of the things that I found most powerful about them, is because it's so easy right now in this moment to feel such fear. I mean, I think it's in your book. You said that we grew up thinking that life would be better and better. There was a sense that life would be better and better over time, and it's really hard to find that at this moment, and that's what I found in your books. It's an extraordinary gift. So thank you very much.